What's going on, adventurers? Hope everybody is doing well. It is springtime, nearing summer. We had our first 95 plus degree day here in Texas. I think it's hit 90 a couple times, but today was the first time on my truck when I pulled out it said 102. Luckily, that was not totally correct. Just it had been sitting in the sun as I got going. It was like 96, 97. But still, that counts for something, and I am not ready for this heat. I want to enjoy spring for just a little bit longer. I've had some trouble with my crappie boat. I bought a boat and did a lot of work on it, overhauling a lot of the electronics, putting a trolling motor on it. It's been quite a process, and had a little bit of trouble with the outboard, so that's been in the shop. Otherwise, I would be fishing right now. But because I couldn't be fishing, I've been doing some DIY projects, some for the boat, which I posted a couple recent videos on, one little hack for the trailer, another just super cheap, easy way to make some rod holders. So worked on those for the boat. I've been doing a rifle review, got a really interesting Savage 300 Winchester Magnum in for review that I'm shooting, tinkering with. That's been a lot of fun, but definitely very experimental as well. And the other thing I've been kind of messing around with is my bow. So this last year, I was on a private hunting lease down in South Texas, but there were a lot of issues with people on the lease. There were issues with the family. We tried to handle it as best we could, but ultimately there were just personalities that were oil and water and didn't get along. And I was just kind of quietly just enjoying going down there to hunt when I could, and other people caused drama that caused everybody basically to lose a lease, which was unfortunate, but it was so far from me. I've talked about this lease several times. It's 6.5 hours down there. This last year, I did not shoot a buck down there. I killed some does. I've killed one decent buck down there. I did kill one nice fallow deer down there, but it seems like the place was really going downhill, and I probably wasn't going to renew anyway. But this little bit of a conflict kind of solidified that. So I lost permission to hunt at that private land spot. There's another permission place that I had access to that just has not been good in the last year. Nobody killed a deer there this last year. The drought in West Texas has been very, very bad. We're in a La Nina year, which means it's dry, it's windy. We're probably going to get some tornadoes. Just weather's been nuts in West Texas. There have been a lot of fires, but all that to say, I am losing access to a lot of private rifle spots. So this next fall, I think my strategy is going to be drawn hunts, both rifle and archery. And just of those, it seems to be far easier to get drawn for the archery hunts. I just think fewer people put in, or there's more opportunity. Hopefully this year I'll get drawn for both. I've been building up some points gradually, but I think I'm extremely likely to get drawn for some sort of an archery hunt in Texas, and I have a decent chance of getting drawn for some kind of rifle hunt. But I also have access to a lot of what they used to be called Type 2 lands in Texas, and a lot of them are Corps of Engineers places or WMAs, places that are small that a lot of times don't let you rifle hunt. I don't know of any of these places, at least near me in North Texas, that let you rifle hunt, but many will allow hunting with a shotgun. And even with a shotgun, some have some pretty intense rules. Like you have to use 2-shot or larger. A lot of these places don't let you deer hunt, but you can hog hunt. Some places don't let you use slugs. Some places you have to use non-toxic, like a copper slug. But a lot of them will let you bow hunt. So all that to say, I think I have just an increasing chance that the majority of my hunts this next fall are going to be bow hunts. So it caused me to really evaluate my archery gear, look into it a little bit more, and in the off season do some tinkering and tuning and get things really settled out early. A lot of times I am doing this in July, August. I kind of, early August, I'm finalizing things, but I want to just be way early to the game this year so that in July and August, I am boots on the ground, scouting like crazy and not messing with my bow. Yeah, I'm practicing, but I've got my system all dialed. So this originally started because my strings were looking a little bit sad on my Hoyt. I think I had gone a year and a half on the set of strings that I had, but that included several South Texas rugged hunts. That included some Idaho stuff, where it was a 7-day backpack hunt. So the bows were out in the snow, the rain, all that stuff. You know, these modern bows can take a lot of it, but the strings are gonna get worn down first. Especially if you're like me and you occasionally carry your bow by the string. That's one of those things that, you know, some archery pro shops will tell you never to do it. Some don't care. Ultimately, it just wears out your string a little faster. I don't think there's any disaster that's going to be caused by doing that, but it is going to put increased wear and tear on your string, especially if you're not awesome about waxing it and just cleaning it and just bow maintenance stuff. So my string was due to be replaced. And I thought, yeah, I could probably get a couple more months on it, but I didn't think I could go through a whole nother season. And I did not want to be doing this right before season or during season, especially as strings stretch out, break in, and bow shops tend to be really, really crowded and hard to access during season or right before season. But right now, they're dead. They're empty. Every time I've been in an archery shop, I've been in the only one in the store. And man, those guys, I really appreciate a lot of these small pro shops. It's people who are passionate about this industry, people who know what they're doing. And a lot of times just purely because of procrastination, they have a really slow season and then a really busy season. And if we all do our part to just think through things just a little bit more in advance and even it out, it'll make it easier on us and it'll make it better for these shops to have more even, consistent business rather than just like a rush and then total downtime. So this was the perfect time for me to go ahead, get the strings on my bow replaced. I went through a local pro shop here in North Texas that I've had them do some work on my bow. I knew one of the guys from some previous business stuff, and it's a good little shop. Worked with them quite a bit. They replaced my strings, and yeah, you can order strings online and then go to a bow shop. If you have a press and you know what you're doing, you can do it all yourself. You just have to make sure you're measuring the right strings, especially with a lot of these bows, both Hoyt and Matthews and Bowtech. There's all these bows that are based on a very common system, but then every year they make incremental changes. So always go by the specs listed on your bow. But what I found was it was better for me to just leave my bow there. They could get the strings ordered, get precise measurements. When they got installed, or when they arrived, they could install them there, and then I could just come pick it up, run a couple of errors through it, make sure it worked, and that worked extremely well. And what was nice is that archery shop was able to measure my nock to peep height from my existing string. They were able to get pretty much everything all set up. They even served in my drop away rest where I had it, which was awesome, because a lot of those things that come with a cable clamp, I think it's a little hokey. They work fine, but I'd always rather have it served in. And so because they were already pressing it to put on the string, they could go ahead and do it all at once. So that was what kind of prompted this overhaul of my bow. I got a new string on there. And then when I was in the shop, I started talking about arrows. I had been shooting Easton FMJ arrows. I was shooting the 6mm ones. And that was primarily because I did not like the 5mm hidden insert system that basically let the broadhead go straight flush against the arrow. A lot of people really like that, so you don't have to use an outsert. But I was not a fan of that system, so I was using the 6mm FMJs. I really like how easy the FMJs are to pull through a target. Once you bury them deep in there, you can just pull them right out. Through deer and hogs, I get pass-throughs the vast majority of the time. There's a couple times I haven't, but they hit hard. They're very accurate. But what I started noticing using the same set of arrows for over 2 years now, yeah, I'd probably hit some rocks, hit some game animals, hit some hard stuff, or just done little things that cause these little micro bends throughout the arrows. And that's one of the downsides of aluminum, is a carbon arrow will always spring back, and an aluminum arrow can hold a bend. So the FMJs were originally very, very accurate, and I think they were straightened to maybe 3/1000ths of an inch. Maybe it was 4 or 5, but I think it was 3 plus or minus 3/1000ths of an inch, which is pretty good. You don't really need more than that. You can use more than that, but I don't think it's necessary for hunting. A lot of competitors are going to use something a little higher end than that, but for hunting, it's great. And then there's this whole trend of heavy arrows that I kind of followed a little bit. I didn't go all the way down the rabbit hole. Working in the archery industry, I recognize that a lot of that stuff is true. A lot of the stuff that people are hearing from Ranch Fairy and other sources talking about heavy arrows, what they're saying is true, but they're misapplying it. And they're killing their arrow speed, and they're doing things that just they're not spining their arrows right. And a lot of it just comes down to if you have a properly tuned bow and an arrow and a broadhead that all do their job well, you can have an arrow that's a lot faster, a lot flatter shooting that hits just as hard as a heavier arrow. But when you don't have your bow tuned properly, when your arrow's not spined properly, the best way to make up for all that stuff is just to increase mass and be shooting a big, fat, heavy Lincoln log. And that's I think it's more of a backup plan, to be honest. It's when you're not doing anything right, well, go ahead and hit them with something hard enough that maybe it doesn't matter. It's the idea of, well, if I shoot a 45-70, I don't have to make a perfect shot every time because I'm using a big enough bullet that it's just going to hit them hard. And yes, that is true, but I don't really like that ideology. I'd rather use a 270 or 6.5 Creedmoor, something that's extremely accurate and flat shooting and still packs one heck of a punch. So it's a balancing act. So I got to talking to the guy at the pro shop about this, and he recommended the Victory armor piercing, the VAP arrows. And I had heard of the VAPs, and I had seen them. They've been around for a while, and I was familiar with the original ones, but what I was not familiar with is the new VAP SS. That is a carbon arrow that is interwoven with stainless steel fibers. So it's a stainless steel mesh woven with carbon. And unlike aluminum, stainless steel is very springy. It will spring back. It won't hold a bend. These arrows aren't quite as heavy. They're heavier than just pure carbon, but they're not as heavy as the FMJs. And previously, I did an episode that I think I called my heavy metal arrow setup, where I was talking about my build where I used FMJs, I used brass inserts, I was going for more weight, everything that got me to that first generation of arrow, and it worked well. I was pretty happy with that arrow for a long time, but one of the things I talked about in that is that I wasn't very interested in micro diameter arrows because they were a bit fragile. They were a bit like pieces of spaghetti that when you really started shooting them hard, hitting hard stuff with them, putting heavy points on them, really putting them to the test, they would break because they're kind of fragile. But since the original carbon arrows, I think things have come a long way. And this Victory armor-piercing arrow with the stainless steel is an incredibly durable arrow. And the guy at the shop even showed me evidence of an arrow that had hit a steel target and didn't have any cracks, didn't have any bends, just had one little scuff. And that kind of sold me. I was really impressed at how durable these were. And what I also liked is Victory's outsert system. So on some of the arrows, like I mentioned, that hidden insert system from Easton, that was a way to not have to use an outsert. And then if you go even smaller, if you use Easton's 4mm size, like the injections, then you start having to use the deep 6 size broadheads and field points, and that's just kind of a non-standard thing. And yeah, I know I'm getting into a realm where I'm not going to be able to use totally standard components, but if I can use something standard, I would prefer to. And I really liked Victory's outsert system. That was a 50 grain aluminum outsert that also went in, so it's locked from the in and the outside of the shaft, and extends a full inch over the shaft, so it really protects the end of the shaft, so it's not going to banana peel and blow out whenever it hits something. So I like that system. I like that it's a 50 grain outsert because I was running 50 grains of brass anyway on my current arrows, and now that I'm using lighter arrows but with the same amount of weight up front on a shorter arrow, I'm actually getting a much, much better FOC without increasing the weight of my arrow. I'm still using a lightweight arrow, but much, much better forward of center. And because I am using this lighter arrow that's a little bit shorter, that could potentially be a lot faster, I didn't want to ruin that by just putting on some sort of fletching system that throws off the FOC or just totally kills the speed. So the previous set of arrows I was using, I went to a 4-fletch. I did some experimentation, and I found that 4-fletch did stabilize that other arrow just maybe a little bit better. Admittedly, I kind of went that way just because it looked cool. I like the idea of I can index it in any position and have great vein clearance. I didn't necessarily have to have one cock feather that was my index location. I could have all the veins the same color, index it in any position. But what I realized is, yes, it did stabilize my really big broadheads very well. But then, and they would fly right with my field points. Once I got my bow and my rest tuned properly, they would hit right next to each other all the time, right on top of each other. But what I realized is when I was going past 50 yards, which again, that's not normal hunt territory, but what I realized is my arrows seemed to just really, really be slowing down a lot. And I think I was getting a little bit of a parachute effect from those veins. I think the 4-fletch, just the amount of surface area, within 40 yards, 3-fletch versus 4-fletch didn't really make any difference, other than slightly better stability. But out at extended ranges, it was really slowing down my arrow and causing a lot more wind resistance. And with that heavy, long, fairly inefficient arrow, it was really falling like crazy. So I considered going back to a 3-fletch, and then when I saw how skinny these arrows are, well, it's a lot easier to fletch skinny arrows with a 3-fletch, especially if you're using a helical. Because if you're using a 4-fletch and a helical, I mean, your veins are practically touching at that point. There's just not much surface area. So I went back to a 3-fletch, and one thing that I'm kind of excited going back to a 3-fletch, because the number of times where I would ruin one vein and then end up trying to peel that off, and then I had to redo my wrap. Then I had to refletch 4 veins on an arrow, and it started taking quite a bit of time. And so now I have, one less vein that I can damage or injure in practice. And even if I do, it's going to be a lot faster to repair this arrow. And I use a Bitzenberg jig. I like fletching all my own stuff. For me, it's just like reloading my ammunition. It's a DIY project. It's me being more involved in the process rather than just, I go buy this one at the store and I think that works well for me. Nope, I like that I know exactly how everything goes together. I have all the components. If I need to repair something, I've got it all. I like that process. So I think with a 3-fletch, it'll actually be nice. I also did use a wrap on my arrow. So I got into making some of these wraps, and now I'm starting to sell them. They're just on eBay right now. If you go to eBay and just search for Archer's Wrap, I found probably the most affordable way to do this, so I can sell them and pass the savings on to anybody who wants them. So search for Archer's Wrap on eBay if you're interested. I've got them in several different colors. I don't have any neon colors right now, just because I found the neon colors fade really, really easily. So if I just used a standard green, a standard yellow, standard orange, standard white, I like white just because it's clean, it's classy, and you can see blood really well. But if you just use flat, just regular colors, they don't fade like some of those fluorescent neon colors do. So I used a 4-inch wrap just because I want to keep it pretty short. Yeah, it can look cool to have this really big wrap on there, just so that your arrows are bright and easy to find and show blood really well. But it does add weight. The material I'm using is lighter than the name brand that most people are familiar with. So it does not add as much weight as those name brand ones do, but any more material you have on the back end, the wrong end of the arrow, adds weight. I do really like using wraps though, because then my shafts stay perfectly clean. I can put this wrap on there, even if I have a gluey mess, even if I have to peel off a vein and redo it, I never have any glue on the carbon that I have to scrape off. And like I said, I like that you can see blood on it. So I did use the wraps. I just went with 4-inch white vinyl wraps. I kept the factory nocks that came with those VAP SS arrows. I may go to a Luminoc. I think Luminoc, or no, I'm sorry, not Luminoc. I think it's Nocturnal. I think they may be the only ones who make the illuminated nocks that fit this skinny of an arrow. There may be other options out there now, but I really like those for when I video my hunts. I'm probably going to do it at some point, but that can be down the road. Not too worried about that right now. I did, when I fletched these arrows, I did use the AAE Max Stealth vanes. I had done some experimentation with those before, and that's what I was using in a 4-fletch configuration previously on my FMJs. And I do really like these vanes. They're a little bit stiffer than blazers, and the boning blazer vanes are incredibly effective. That's why almost every factory arrow comes with blazers or a copycat or a private label rebrand thereof. So if you see like Easton arrows that come with the bully vanes, those are made by boning. Those are just boning blazers that are private labeled. And there's several that are similar. They're very, very effective at stabilizing the arrow without robbing speed, but they are kind of noisy and they are pretty tall. So I liked that the AAE, the Max Stealth vanes, they are longer, but they're lower profile. So they have actually a little bit more surface area, but I think because they're stiffer, they're a lot quieter and they're very effective. So I think per their size, the blazers are technically a little bit more effective at stabilizing it. But these, if you use slightly longer stealth vanes, you can get the exact same balance. You can get a really good helical, and your arrow flight itself is actually a lot quieter. And of course, anytime you're picking out your wrap and your vanes and your nock, it gets to be kind of a fun project of customizing the look of your arrow. So I went with the white wraps, and with the vanes previously, I just did all orange. I kind of like that look. It matched my orange strings. But now that I have a 3-fletch configuration, I can't use them in any position. I need to have an index vane, so I used orange there and just went with white. So still going with kind of the white and orange thing, but it looks pretty cool. It looks pretty classy. So I like how that turned out. On the other end of the arrow, I am using the outserts that came with those VAPs. And I did have to get new field points because the diameter on those is 5/16. It was a hair smaller on the 6mm FMJs, just because that is a straight, basically flush fit from the arrow shaft to the insert to the field point. And now that the outsert has a little bit of a taper, it actually goes to a larger diameter on the front, pretty standard size, that 5/16. But I did not have those in stock, so I went to Scheels, picked some of those up. I'm a big fan of Scheels now. They always have pretty high quality stuff, great service. I'm always impressed. It just seems like the equipment and the products they sell compared to Academy, it's just so much nicer. No, it's not going to be the cheapest, best deal, but you know you can get quality stuff there. So got those at Scheels. Then when I was there, I felt a little bit inspired to continue the color matching theme, so I got a new Wristling that was orange and black, kind of to match the look. Previously, I had a black one. It was from Apex Gear, but the little piece of leather that connects to the bow that the Wristling actually loops through, somehow I managed to tear it. I was out practicing, I picked it up and noticed that it had torn. So I don't know if I did something to do that or if it just gradually wore out. So I was just going to swap out that one little leather piece, but I don't know. I guess the style tinkering thing kind of got a hold of me, and I just decided to buy a new one that matched a little bit better. So I got suckered into that, but it looks great. I also, when I was doing that, I went with a longer stabilizer. So previously, I had been using the Apex Gear in-game carbon fiber stabilizer with weights at the end. That thing is a great stabilizer. For the price, that's going to be my go-to recommendation for anybody. It's just a great starting point. If you want, if you're on a reasonable budget, it's not the cheapest one out there, but it is definitely not the most expensive. You can save a lot and still get a very high quality carbon fiber stabilizer with an adjustable weight system. The only problem is they make it in a 6-inch and an 8-inch. And for most hunters, those are the perfect sizes. But for this Hoyt Helix that I'm shooting, there's now newer Hoyts. I think this is a 2019, maybe even 2018 model. I think it's a 19 model Helix. There's a lot that are based on this, but the riser is so deflexed, it curves back so much that you need a little bit extra length to make it come out as far as it normally would. So what most people would get in terms of how far out their weight is with an 8-inch, I had to go up to a 10-inch bar to get that. And I realized I don't want to just be adding more weight. You'll hear all these competition shooters who talk about using 10 ounces up front and 8 ounces in the back. And to me, as a hunter, that is just way, way too much weight. So if you're not going to add more weight, the only way to get the advantage to work in that same way is to make it longer, to push your weight further out so you now have more leverage. It's a longer fulcrum arm. And what's interesting is Bee Stinger archery products, Bee Stinger is known for these type of stabilizers. They actually have a patent that's a certain ratio of length to weight in terms of how it balances. And I think that's why Apex Gear never made that 10-inch size, because it would violate Bee Stinger's patent. But I went with Viper. Viper was the name of it. I was thinking of my arrows that are Victory arrows. Viper Archery Products does sell this in a 10-inch. And I don't know if they're violating that patent or if the weight balance is just different, because the weights are a bit smaller. So I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's one of those things that's so nuanced. They may be just under a certain weight limit or something. But because my riser was so deflex, it's not like one of these straight risers like on a Matthews. I wanted to have a little bit longer of a stabilizer to make it that much more effective. So that's why I went with the Viper Archery Products 10-inch stabilizer. It only came with 2 weights on there. I don't see why you would ever get this stabilizer and take off one or both of them. And it may be that they would have put 3, but then including 3 would violate the Bee Stinger patent, so they only included 2. Maybe that's what it is, but 2 weight seems to be about right. Now, I also like putting a GoPro on the end of my stabilizer, which is about the equivalent of putting about 10 more of these weights on there. So I've been shooting it without that, and it's been super comfortable, holds really well. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the same configuration for the GoPro or not. When I was hunting in Idaho, technically you're not allowed to have anything electronic connected to the bow, so I had to just take it off, but my whole trip I ended up not taking a shot up there anyway, so it didn't really matter. Most of my GoPro shots were just really cool hiking and nature shots anyway. So going with that new stabilizer, so far I like it. So far it's been working really well. Again, stabilizers aren't a very sophisticated technology. It just comes down to having a bar that's really light and really stiff with weight all the way out as far as you can put it in terms of how it's going to affect your balance. That's going to be the best. And then it comes beyond that. It just comes down to, in terms of physical size and weight constraints, what can you stand to schlep around the mountains? If you're a competition archer and you just got to walk up to the line with it, no big deal. But if you're going to hike with it, yeah, you're probably not going to be running a 15-inch bar or a 20, 30-inch bar like some of these competitors do. So a 10-inch bar seemed to be perfect. For me, it also fits in my soft case. Anything bigger, I would have to take it off every time. I do have one of those Cobra, basically you halfway unscrew the bar, then it can kind of hinge up and 90-degree fold up. So you can fold up the bar instead of taking it completely off. But then when I started getting into it, I put that on at first, but then I realized, well, that adds 3 ounces to the bow. I have to halfway unscrew it anyway. I might as well just completely unscrew it when I need to take it off. So I ended up not going with that thing. I just left that back in my bin. So that's my arrows, my sling, my stabilizer. But when I changed arrows, it just seems like I've experienced this in rifles a whole lot. If you stay with pretty much standardized systems, compatibility is easy. There aren't issues. I've built a lot of ARs with people, for people, and if you stay with just like a carbine length or mid-length 223 with standard components, you can pretty much just slap it together pretty quick and it's going to run great. But then when you start getting into weird calibers, ultralight components, strange chamberings, weird barrel specs, proprietary rails, stuff like that, you can start chasing some of these weird compatibility issues. And I kind of ran into that a little bit when I went down the path of these new arrows. So those 6mm arrows would fit in. You could go to a sporting goods store and pick up any quiver, and they would just fit. And that's what's great about those 5mm, 6mm, anything in that kind of 270 to 300 diameter. They just work with anything. So it's very forgiving. But when I went to these 166 diameter, that's the inside diameter. These are roughly 4mm outside diameter arrows. You start running into compatibility issues with quivers. And it would not fit in my Apex Reactor XL quiver, which I really like that quiver. I like that the same model can switch from right hand to left hand. So it makes it really nice for, if you're going to use it for a while and sell it or loan it to a buddy, or move it from bow to bow. It's just super flexible, very adjustable, great little quiver. But the grippers are just rubber molded grippers that fit just kind of a standard arrow range. I think they'll go down to fit the 5mm just fine, but the 4mm, they just slip right through. Especially with these VAPs that have kind of a slick coating on the outside, there was just no way it was going to work. So I had to look for a quiver that could cinch down and hold some smaller diameter arrows. And there's really only one main option in the industry, and that's the tight spot. I'm sure there are other people who are chomping at the bit, waiting for a patent to expire, waiting to find some other way to work around this. But tight spot has a system where you put your arrows in, then you can actually tighten down. It's basically just a wedge. It's not anything that's very high tech. They just laid claim to it. And so it's this wedge that allows you to really tighten down the grippers to fit even very, very small diameter arrows. So tight spot is, their normal quiver that most people are familiar with just mounts to the sight, just like most other quivers. Then it has a cam over lever that can attach or detach from a dovetail mounting bracket. Pretty standardized system. A lot of other quivers work in the same way. But I almost always keep my quiver on when I'm shooting. Now, when I am in my platform stand on my lease in South Texas, yeah, I'd take it off. And I actually had a hook that I would put it on. But I don't even have access to that place to hunt anymore. And I just realized there were so many times hiking in the woods, I'm always leaving my quiver on. And then, sometimes I'll take it off. But I'm of the mentality that, I don't know, I've heard people who say, I never shoot with my quiver on because it throws off my balance. Well, if you always hunt from a tree stand or a ladder stand, you can probably make that work for you. But if you ever hunt from the ground, you just have to learn to shoot with your quiver on because any moment you could be shooting somewhere. You don't necessarily have some place to toss your quiver or set it somewhere or hang it. You got to be ready. So I wanted a quiver that was very lightweight, and I realized if I'm going to leave it on the bow all the time, I might as well get a 2-piece quiver because now I don't have to support that long spine connecting the system. I can use my riser to connect the gripper into the quiver and the hood. So that would help me save a little bit of weight and keep it nice and close to the bow so it's not hanging out and really offsetting my balance. So I went with the new Tight Spot 2-piece quiver, and it's incredibly adjustable. And I really, really like that. Just the ability to adjust how far you want the two sections to come out. You can have every piece, you can change the angle of, you can change the length, you can change the distance. It's great. And it has an insert system so it can fit Hoyt, Matthews, Bowtech, Prime, Elite, just about any bow. It comes with everything. I mean, I think every main bow manufacturer now has little indentions where you can mount a 2-piece quiver, but 1-piece quivers still dominate the market just because most people like to be able to take them on and off. Yeah, you technically could take this off, but you're going to have to undo 2 Allen screws every single time. So I think 2-piece quivers kind of go to the guys who leave them on. But all that to say, it's incredibly adjustable, but adjustable also means it takes a little bit of time to get it set the way you like it. But then once you get it there, you can lock it down. So that's what I did. I spent quite a bit of time tinkering with this, getting it set back far enough so that it didn't interfere with my rest. Got that all set up. Works great. And when I mentioned my rest, so I was previously using the Apex Gear Surge drop away. Another great high value rest. Absolutely would recommend I was actually shooting one of the very, very first models of that, and it had been on this bow for 3 years. And after 3 years, it was full of dust and dirt and mud, and man, I abused that thing. And it was starting to get just a little bit rough to pull back. It still worked great. Even after all that abuse, it never actually had any issues. But it was starting to get a little bit worn off, and then it has a capture bar on the top that's plastic that at some point I had broken that off in the field. So I'm like, okay, it's time for a little bit of a refresh. And with these arrows, again, like I said, I'm chasing specs, I'm chasing compatibility. Because the outsert covers an inch of the arrow, I realized my rest was actually going to be on the outsert, not on the shaft. Maybe that would have been fine, but it didn't sit well with me to not have the rest supporting the actual shaft of the arrow. I didn't want it on the outsert. So that meant I needed something that sat a little further back. And that surge is great. It's an awesome rest, but the launcher arm of it is a 45-degree angle. So that meant almost in any position, it was going to be angled forward slightly. And that's part of the technology that helps it drop away so incredibly fast. So I ended up going with a rest. I just went with a QAD Ultra Rest HDX. It's kind of the industry standard in that sort of stuff. I do think the Apex actually dropped a little bit faster. It worked a little bit differently, but the QAD is a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact. And for me, the main deal here is that when the launcher is in the up position, it is almost completely vertical. And I knew I was going to have to set stuff a little further back, not right on the shelf. I was going to have to set it back a little ways. And so the closer to vertical I could be, that would help me, because that means I don't have to just be crazy far back to avoid setting on that outsert. So I went with the QAD because my bow was already served and ready for that surge rest. I was able to just get a tool and split the string where it was already split, just kind of wedge that open a little bit more, feed the actuation cable through there. And if you don't know, to set these, what you want to do is pull the cable through there. Don't knot it. Don't put any sort of knot serving. Don't attach it yet. Just let it be pinched tight in the string. Then draw the bow back and friction will tighten up on that. It'll pull to where it pulls the rest up. And then as you keep pulling, then the string will start to slip through. The actuation cable will start to slip through your bus cable, and it'll slip through till the point that it just can't slip anymore. And then your rest is all the way up in the position. Then you let down, tie a knot right there, and you're good to go. So if you let them time themselves instead of trying to figure out how long your cable is and how long it's going to go back, it's so easy if you just let it slip through and time itself. So did that, then tied a knot in it, fused the end of that cable just so it would not get frayed. And then I measured the position of the QAD just to match my surge so that it would be in time with where the rest of my bow was tuned. And that thing pretty much went without a hitch. One thing that I don't like so far is the little sticky felt pads that come with the QAD. The one that goes on the capture bar is great. The one that goes on the actual launcher, it feels like it doesn't actually fit and wrap around that well. So I don't know, these new arrows are so slick. I may not even need that. I'm just going to see how it goes. I've got it on there right now. They're so thin that it doesn't make a difference in terms of the shot. But I may pull that off. I may just put a piece of gaff tape or some moleskin. Every hiker has moleskin laying around, and that's a pretty good option for this kind of stuff. It's very similar to this felt pad. But I may not even use anything there. Time will tell. So the last thing that I kind of overhauled in my kind of bow setup, and again, this was kind of in the case of, well, a lot of this stuff, people will wisely say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I was kind of in the mentality of, well, I'm tuning up everything. I already have to re-sight in. I have to recalibrate. There's so many differences. Let me optimize everywhere I can. And this last year, I was shooting the new Apex Gear Magnitude sight. So it kind of replaced the Attitude, their multi-pin sight, but it was just overbuilt. It was beefy, really big 2-inch diameter aperture. The fiber, actually wraps around the aperture instead of running back through the frame of the sight. So that helps if you're in like a ground blind and all the light's coming from in front of you. This is now going to be a little bit better because it's gathering light all from up front. What I like about it is if you're using the detachable mount or any other system, you don't have to worry about routing the fibers. They're all staying in the same spot. So I used that magnitude last year. I had used the covert, which is the moving sight by Apex Gear, single pin that you can dial out to any distance. So you can sight in at 20 and then sight in at 40 and then pick the right tape, and then you're usually good out to 80 or 90, depending on your arrow velocity. So really cool single pin. There are some disadvantages to using a single pin. I did a video about this, kind of talking about, well, should you use a single pin or a multi-pin? What's the thought process there? And so what I actually ended up doing is I took two different sights apart. The magnitude that I used last year, I took it apart, and I'm shooting, I guess I'm shooting a covitude or a magnivert. I don't know what you want to call it, but I'm shooting the front half of the magnitude mounted to the moving system of the covert. So I got it all set up just like a regular multi-pin sight right now. So I locked down the moving system dead center, not moving, and then I got all my pins set appropriately for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. So running it as a 5-pin, I may take that 60 out and just go as a 4-pin because I can now also dial this sight. So I can dial this out to 82, 91, 71, 56, whatever I want. So I kind of have the best of both worlds in one sight. Now that does make it a little bit beefier because I straight up frankensteined two different sight models together. But it's really cool, and it turned out really well. And I hope Apex actually goes into production with something like this because, yeah, it is chunky, but it literally, for the guy who wants to dial sometimes, for, you know, practicing those really long range shots at the range, but then he's going to be up in a tree stand and he absolutely does not want to dial. He wants just regular pins. I now have both. And previously, I had used the covert 4-pin that was a mover version of the covert, and that's cool, and that does most of this, but the way I had it set up, I would lock it in position and use my first pins 20, 30, 40, and then that 40 would be my mover. But I talked to Carson from Final Draw TV. I've worked with him a lot. He also shoots a pretty similar sight setup from Apex Gear. He actually has his setup where his tape is calibrated to the top pin. So if he wants to dial his top pin, that becomes his mover. So he can dial that to 27. Instead of using his 30 pin, he can just dial his top pin and move that top pin to 51, 27, 29, wherever he wants it. And so it's kind of almost like a different ideology. I was using it as I guess it's a multi-pin sight to a point, and then after that it turns into, okay, you want more distance, now you have to dial. I was almost using it like a scope reticle where, okay, I have some holds, but then if I want more, I have to dial. Whereas he was using his as at any point, it could be either or. The only disadvantage to that is you may not be able to get quite as much range because you're using the pin that's high up in the housing instead of a pin that's lower in the housing. So by using my bottom pin to extend it, I could technically extend it a little bit further. And he would always swear that wasn't that big of a deal to him. And I was like, well, that's like a 30-yard difference on my setup. And I realized I was using these big, heavy arrows that were pretty slow. And that's why I needed more adjustment range. So now that I'm using a pretty fast arrow, I could do it either way. And by calibrating it with my pin set up, my index pin on the covert set up right in the middle, I could, at any point, once I figure out what tape that goes on this, I could calibrate it to any one of my pins. So to be determined how I'm going to set that up, probably the bottom pin, but I don't know. I'll be thinking on that. I may even try it one way and then switch it over to another way. What's nice is I can do that, and the whole time, it doesn't affect my multi-pin sight. As long as I make sure to put that sight right back in the same position, then that thing just rocks and rolls and is ready to go 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, just like a normal multi-pin sight. So shooting the Magnivert or Covitude, whatever you want to call it this year, But it's been fun to kind of think through all this stuff when I'm not trying to meet a deadline, when I'm not trying to prepare for a specific hunt, when I can just conveniently in the off season tinker with my bow and just work through, how can I optimize every component, make it just a little bit better, not be in a hurry, and it's fun. So I hope this was helpful to you. If you have an opportunity to just take a look at your bow, start messing with it and just say, okay, what problems did I experience last year? Or what things weren't problems, but I'd like them to be a little bit better, and just learn how you can make your equipment just one step better. And it may be that there could be compatibility issues where you've been on the edge and you could find something that works a little bit better. Maybe you do want to go down that heavy arrow route. Maybe you want more speed. There are so many different options, and anybody who swears that there's only one way to do it usually has an agenda, to be honest. There are so many different options that can all work well, and everything is a balancing act. So tinker, balance accordingly, figure out where you want it to be. But I recommend take this time in the off season to go out and shoot and enjoy it, enjoy the process, enjoy tinkering, and turn your bow into a little bit better of a shooting machine while you have the time and convenience and the availability at the archery shops to do this. So that way next season when you're going out to shoot, you're ready to go. And heck, I'm probably going to be going before then. I hope to go out and shoot some pigs, because now that my bow is dialed and I've got a broadhead that flies true at 50 yards, I kind of want to put that through a hog. So hopefully that was helpful as I overhauled my bow, the Bowverhaul, I call it. Maybe you can do the same. Maybe you just say, hey, I love my setup. I don't want to change anything, but this was good to think through. Take it however you will. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.